lecture also. Now, requirement engineering. Basically, we have understood what actually the requirement means. Requirement is the need, the want, or what actually the customer wants from the software. How it want to perform, how it want to get operated, and so many more things, such as what functionalities it should include. So these are the questions which are answered in the requirement. Now, when we say engineering the requirements, this particular process is what? This is going to tell us the process, how we are going to establish the requirements, how we are going to gather the requirements for a particular system or for a particular software. So the process of establishing what services are required and constraints on the system's operation and development. So there are two things. One major terminology used is what service are required, and second one is what constraints should be put on the system's operation and development. So these are the two major things we are going to establish, and the process is called as requirement engineering. Now, it encompasses the set of tasks that lead to an understanding of. That means these are the set of tasks which are going to be encompassed in this particular engineering process. So, requirement engineering process will include these particular set of tasks. What are these set of tasks? First one is what the business impact of the software will be. That means if this particular software has been designed, what will be the business impact? What the customer wants, whatever the need of the customer is, that is included. Next thing is how end user will interact with the software. That means how this particular end user wants to get this particular software operated. So these are the three major set of tasks that are need to be encompassed in this particular process. So now, after understanding what actually the requirement engineering process is, we are going to understand what are the steps for the requirement engineering processes. So basically, we define that there are 4 steps in requirement engineering process. Sometimes feasibility is tend to be as a pre-task or pre-step for these particular 4 steps. So we need to always learn and always do the feasibility study before all these steps. So the steps which are going to define are feasibility study, then the requirement elicitation and analysis. Now, what actually elicitation means? Elicit means to draw. Elicit means to draw. So what I need to do is I need to draw out the requirements from the stakeholders. Now, I'm not going to use only customers. I'm going to use the word stakeholders. Who are stakeholders? Stakeholders are all the parties which are going to profit from this particular software if developed, right? So we are going to talk about these stakeholders. All the requirements are drawn from the stakeholders, right? Now, second thing is analyze. Once we have drawn and gathered all the requirements, we need to analyze these particular requirements. Analyze means we need to figure out, we need to customize, we need to classify, we need to organize these requirements. So all these comes under the analyzing process. That is customize, classify, organize, prioritize, that is giving the priority, etc., etc. Then we have to specify the requirements, and lastly the requirements are need to be validated, right? Now, after this validation process, validation means what? Validation means whether we have done the right, we have worked for the right product or not. Requirements document, that means these particular requirements which have prioritized and gathered, these are need to be documented further. Now let's see the first thing, that is what actually the feasibility study is. Before that, we have taken up the complete process model in the graphical format. That is, first thing is feasibility study. This is termed to be as a pre-step for requirement engineering process. That means the basic steps of requirement engineering process starts from here to here. These are the basic 4 steps. And before these steps, feasibility study is always done. Now, requirement elicitation and analysis. This is the first step. Second step is the requirement specification. Then third step is the requirement validation that we have talked about. And then the requirements documentation, that is defining the SRS, right? This can be termed as the output of this particular process. The output of this particular process will be what? It will be the SRS, that is software requirement specification. Okay, now let's see what actually feasibility study is. See, when we say feasibility, it has been came from the term feasible. What actually feasible means? Feasible means the main term is capable, means capable of being used or dealt successfully. That means in terms of feasible, in terms of whether a particular project is feasible to be undertaken or not, that has to be decided on the basis of whether we can deal this particular project successfully, whether this particular software, if made, is capable of doing all the capable of solving all the problems which are to be resolved in terms of problem statement. So that is what feasibility study here is. So feasibility study is a study made before committing to a project. That means before you say yes or no to a project, that yes, we are agreeing to the project development, you need to perform a feasibility study. On the basis of feasibility study, this particular study can lead to a decision which can be, yes, you can go ahead. This is one option. Second option, it can be that, let's say, if a particular project can be dealt successfully, then you will say go ahead. If it cannot be dealt successfully, let's say the budget is too low and the functionalities to be included are much more and time is very less. So in this term, it is not feasible. So it can be termed as do not go ahead. Or the third option can be think again. In terms of think again, there are certain negotiations which are to be done. Example, let's say the budget can be increased or the timeline can be defined more time, or what can be done, the functionalities can be prioritized and certain minimum priority functionalities can be removed. So negotiation can be done in term of third option, right? So this will give you the final decision whether to go ahead, whether to commit for this project or do not commit, or certain negotiations are to be done with the client, right? Now in production of projects, the feasibility of study often leads to a budget request. That is a main agenda for this particular project. A feasibility study may be in the form of a proposal, right? It can be termed as a feasibility report or it can be termed as a feasibility proposal. Now moving further, there are 4 types of feasibility study. Basically, you will see three types of feasibility study. One is technical, economical, and operational, but one more is added, and that has been defined as schedule feasibility. So first is the technical feasibility. Technical feasibility, that means whenever we are going to study if a project is feasible to be undertaken or not, we are going to talk about on these four terms: technical, schedule, economic, and fourth one as operations. So these are the certain questions which are needed to be answered, and according to which the final report is to be considered. That is, in technical feasibility, we are going to see whether the project is possible with current technology or not. Second, what are the technical risks involved in this project? Third, whatever the technology is needed, whether it is available, whether all the resources are available with us, whether it is compatible with other systems, how much mentality it will be needed in future regarding this particular technology. So these questions are to be answered in technical feasibility. Second is schedule feasibility. Schedule feasibility, as the name suggests, you can understand that it is going to find out if it is possible to build a solution in a specific time, in time to be useful, right? What if the project gets delayed? Any constraints on the schedule that should be defined, right? Whether you are going to meet all these constraints, or is it possible to meet all the constraints regarding the schedule or not? So all these questions are answered in the schedule feasibility. Third one is the economic feasibility. Now in economic feasibility, we are going to answer the question that is the project possible with the given resource constraints? Second is the main part is called as the cost benefit analysis, right? What are the benefits, tangible, intangible, how do you quantify them? And we are going to see whether this particular project is worth developing the cost or not. That is the main economic feasibility, cost analysis. Fourth one is operational feasibility. In this operational feasibility, we are going to work on the operation part. That is, if the system is developed, will it be used by the end user? Will it be helpful in solving all the problems? Will it give all the functionalities, human and social issues, etc., etc.? So all these types of feasibility study are going to be undertaken. And finally, the feasibility report is prepared. Now, second thing, we start off with the first step of requirement engineering process, that is the requirement elicitation and analysis. I have joined two steps in this: requirement elicitation and requirement analysis. This is the second step. Now in this step, we have divided this particular into four parts. What are these four parts? First is called as the requirement discovery. Requirement discovery is what? Requirement discovery, and after that it is requirement classification and organization. Then we have requirement prioritization and negotiation, and lastly the requirement specification. So what we need to do is, first thing is requirement discovery. In discovery, what we are going to do, we are going to interact with all these stakeholders. So first thing is we are going to interact, right? After interacting, we are going to gather all the information or all the requirements from the stakeholders, and we are going to use different procedures or different tools and techniques to gather the information from to gather the requirements from the stakeholders or the customers for the existing system or the system which is needed to be existed. Those are such as interview, questionnaires, survey, prototyping, etc. We will see in next slide. The tools and techniques used for gathering the information. So basically, we are going to perform two steps. First is interaction, and second one is information gathering. Right. Next one is second step, that is called as the requirement classification and organization. Now, in requirement classification, we need to organize the overall structure of the system. We need to organize, right? How do we organize? We are going to put all the related requirements together and decompose the system into subcomponents of related requirements. And then we define the relationship between these different requirements together. What happens, this particular classification and organization is helpful when we define the architecture design pattern. So this particular will be helpful in designing the architecture pattern, right? Design architecture pattern. Now, third step says requirement prioritization and negotiation. That means what? We are going to set, let's say we have 12 functionalities or 12 requirements which are to be included. Let's just assume. So out of these 12, we need to prioritize the requirements. Which one has the higher priority and which one has the lower priority, so that the requirements with higher priority can be given more focus and time as compared to the requirements with the lower priority. Because if at the end of the day, if the project is completed and the time is out and the project is or software is having the low priority requirements, but some high priority requirements are excluded or remaining, then the customer will not be satisfied. So according to the priority, we have to define the working. And lastly, the fourth step is requirement specification. That means we are going to specify the requirements, right? Now, this is what we were talking about. That is, in this particular requirement discovery, we had interaction and information gathering. So how we can gather the information is, the answer is here. We are going to use these particular techniques, which are called as requirement elicitation techniques, to gather the information, which are such as document analysis, focus groups, interface analysis, interviews, observation, process modeling, prototype, requirement workshop, etc. That's all for this lecture. Thank you very much.